Have we been listening to the prophecy seminars? Is the time coming when we will feel like we're standing alone? Okay. Do we need to prepare for this time? We do. How do we prepare? Well, let's go in our Bibles then to the book of Daniel and chapter 0. To train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. Because a thinker can stand for their beliefs though the heavens fall. But a reflector will go along with the flow when the flow changes. Perhaps it's a little strong. Let's say this differently. Parents are to represent the character of God to their children. Spending time listening to your child tell you that story that they've already told you 5,673 times with all the tiny little details is showing them the character of a God who says, my ear is always open to your prayer. I know, radical concepts. We'll talk more about this. Our topic this morning is a vital one in true education, and yet another impossibility to cover in an hour. So again, I just challenge each one of you to take these things that we're talking about and continue in studying them. And so let's begin with a word of prayer as we start. Father in heaven, again, we are so thankful to be here. We're so thankful for this event, thankful for these opportunities that we have. We still have the freedom to come and gather and study, and I pray that we'll make the most of it. Lord, this morning as we begin to study some more in true education, I pray that you will speak to us, that you'll send the Holy Spirit to guide our minds, the holy angels to be around this place and protect us. I pray that you'll speak through me. May this message and these words be from you, for it's in Jesus' name I ask. Amen. Our key paragraph this morning comes from the book Education, page 17. I quickly read it yesterday as one of the points on true education. We're going to study it more in depth this morning. Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality, power to think and to do. It is the work of true education to develop this power, to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thought. Okay, this will be our theme as we're going to dive into this more deeply. Every human being created in the image of God. How many of us are human beings here this morning? Is it all of us? I hope. No non-humans? Okay, so we've all been created in the image of God, and part of this image of God is something known as individuality, power to think and to do. It's something God himself has and he created us with. Individuality, power to think and to do. What is the power to think and to do? It's a decision-making power. It is not just thinking without application. It is the ability to think and then act upon those thoughts. It is the ability to have a belief and know the reason why you have that belief. And it is contrasted as the opposite of this is to be a reflector of other men's thoughts. And it's connected with true education when it says that it's the work of true education to develop this in us, to be a thinker instead of a reflector. Again, we'll unpack this more deeply, but this is our theme. Now, there's a lot of counsel that we have on this. Here's one from Christian Leadership. God has given men talents, which he means that they should use. He has given them minds, and he means that they should become thinkers and do their own thinking and planning rather than depend upon others to think and plan for them. We find that same theme again, right? To think for yourself rather than depending upon someone else to do your thinking for you. That's not to say we can't utilize the thoughts and opinions of others and benefit from them, but we're not dependent upon them. God has given us a mind. He designs we use it. Now, if we look in society today, we find that thinking skills are at an all-time low. One study found more than 80% of employers said recent graduates were deficient in critical thinking. Another study found less than 1% of high school graduates, secondary school graduates, rated excellent at critical thinking. That means 99-point-some% of secondary school graduates were ranked below excellent in critical thinking skills. That makes me say, do we have a problem in education? That we can't produce someone who can think well. Psychologists say that maybe around half the population, a little less than half the population, is even capable of being a good thinker. And while less than half of us may be capable of it, they tell us that only around 5% of the population actually uses it. Only 5% of us are actually thinking for ourselves. The rest of us just depending on what everyone else is doing. Now, there's a lot of directions we could take this discussion. We could talk about this from an academic perspective. We could talk about it from a day-to-day practical perspective, the importance of thinking skills. But I want to focus this morning particularly on the spiritual ramifications of this. We're told that moral purity depends on right thinking. Do we want to be morally pure? Do we want our young people to be morally pure? What does it depend upon? Right thinking, it says. Not only does moral purity depend on right thinking, but we're told young men must be trained up to be thinkers. So it should be part of the educational process to train a thinker. And God calls upon everyone with whom he works to do the very highest kind of thinking. So moral purity depends on right thinking. It needs to be part of the educational process. And if we want to work for the Lord, we need to be a good thinker. We already have 3 good reasons. But now let's go to our Bibles, because the Bible tells us something about the spiritual ramifications of being a thinker or not. Revelation chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. I think probably here at this conference we're already quite familiar with these verses, but let's go there anyway. Revelation chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. Revelation chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. And the Bible tells us in verse 2, I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. Is this the seal that we want here? The one of the living God? Amen? Okay. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God. Where? On their feet? Shoulder? Back of the head? No. What's it say? Forehead. Okay. What's the significance of the forehead? Frontal lobe. Okay. Decision-making abilities, thinking skills. And in fact, science supports this. There's a part of the brain known as the anterior cingulate cortex, located within the frontal lobe, responsible for many important functions. But note the last 2 here on the list. Error detection. Recognizing between truth and error. Would that be important for a Christian? Vital. Okay. It's centered in this part of the brain. It's also the center of the free will. In other words, this is the moral decision-making center of the brain. And so what is God saying here in Revelation? He says, I want to place my seal upon the moral decision-making center of the brain. I hope we all realize the mark of the seal of God is not some visible stamp that comes along and marks the forehead. Right? This is symbolic, representing a period of time, and God says, I know the decisions of this person. I know the thinking of this person. They're not going along with the flow of the world. They're thinking for themselves, depending upon me for their beliefs. They have a reason for their beliefs. They have evidence for their belief. I know their decisions, God says. But this is a battle. And if God wants to place his seal upon our forehead, do you think the enemy might want to place his seal upon the same place? Revelation chapter 14, verse 9. What does it tell us about the mark of the beast? It says it will be placed where? Forehead or hand. Interesting distinction there. God says, I want my seal placed on the forehead. He wants us to choose to follow him. Satan says, I want my seal placed on the forehead. I want them to choose. But if he can't get it there, what will he do? He'll go with the hand. In other words, actions without decision. Just going with the flow, doing what everyone else does. But both sides want to place their seal upon the forehead, upon the decision-making abilities. And this is a theme all throughout the scriptures. Let's take another verse. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. What does it tell us? Be not, anyone know it? Be not conformed to this world. What's conformed? Give me another word for conformed. Reflecting, maybe? Don't be reflecting what everyone else is doing, but rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may Do we need to read this verse? That we don't have it memorized? That it says that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. What's the significance of proving? You have the evidence for it. You can show the reason for it. You're not just going along with the flow. How? By the renewing of your mind. You see the difference here. Don't be conformed. Don't just do what everyone else is doing, but rather have the evidence. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may prove what is that good and perfect, good and acceptable, perfect will of God. The warfare in which we are engaged is largely mental. We're not fighting a battle of swords and guns. We're fighting a battle over the mind. It was the historian Carter Woodson who said, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You think our enemy knows this? Do you think our enemy is trying to control our thinking so that he can get our actions in the process? Exactly. It was a famous leader who enjoyed enormous popularity, elected by the majority vote, and who once said, how fortunate for leaders that men do not think. Just think on that for a moment. How fortunate for leaders that men do not think. Who do you think said this? This was Adolf Hitler. This was Adolf Hitler. We talk about Hitler and we think that he forced his way into power by force of arms. No. He was elected by a majority vote, using many of the promises very popular in politics today. And we say, well, I wouldn't have made that. I wouldn't have fallen for that. Don't be so quick. Because it was Christians who voted Hitler into power, including over 90% of Seventh-day Adventists voted for Hitler. We say, how could they do that? Well, no one was thinking. That's why. No one was thinking. That's why it's the special work of Satan in these last days to take possession of the minds of our youth. And not only the youth, all our minds. Satan wants possession of them. So with this groundwork laid, I want to go back to the statement that we started with. Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality, power to think and to do. It is the work of true education to develop this power, to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thought. So, it tells us here, pardon just one moment, I need to make an adjustment here. I gave a slightly incorrect PowerPoint. Don't worry, it won't affect the live stream, but I'm just going to swap it here. Okay, very good. Excellent. Individuality. Let's highlight this for a moment. Power to think and to do. This is the key word involved. What does it mean, individuality? What type of thinking are we talking about here? Because, you know, when you talk about a thinker, maybe you imagine someone who's really intelligent, or someone who, I don't know, has a couple of PhDs, their doctorate. We think, oh, that's a good thinker. Are they a good thinker? No, I heard not necessarily. Okay, they might be, they might not be. In other words, how much information you have in your mind, how much schooling you've gone through is no guarantee of whether or not you're a good thinker. The key is this word individuality. God has created us to be connected with Him individually. We are not saved because we are part of this church. Amen? Okay, now we're hesitant to say amen to that. But really, we're not saved. Our salvation is not contingent upon our belonging to this church. It's important we belong to the church, yes. But that's not our salvation. Our salvation is our connection with God. Amen? individual relationship with Jesus. This is our means of salvation. So, God needs to work with us individually. He needs to take control of our mind. He needs to guide in our beliefs. And this ability to think individually means that you can have a belief and you know the reasons why you have that belief. Not that you have that belief because your pastor believes that way. You don't have that belief because your church believes that way, though that can influence it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you are not dependent upon that for your beliefs. You're dependent upon God's word for the belief. And he works with us through our mind. Now, people want to say that there's you can't harmonize faith with evidence, or as they want to say, about thinking. You can't harmonize thinking with faith. I beg to differ, because my faith is based on evidence. How about yours? Do we have the evidence of the Word of God that strengthens our faith? Do we have an intelligent faith that when someone asks us the reasons for our faith, we can give it? We should, right? So absolutely this harmonizes. Now there are times when God asks us to believe something without seeing the evidence, but we can do that because we've already had the evidence for our faith. We know he's trustworthy, right? So this individual thought is the ability to have a belief, and because you have that belief based on evidence, it means you're not depending upon other people for your ideas, your thoughts, or beliefs. It means that you will reason from cause to effect, you will make wise decisions, and because of that, you will stand for it even if everyone else is doing something different. Is the time coming when we will feel like we are standing alone? Friends, have you been studying prophecy? Is the time coming when we will feel like we're standing alone? Okay. Do we need to prepare for this time? We do. How do we prepare? It's not by going to social media and depending upon other people for our thoughts and ideas. If we are accustomed to depending upon other people for our thoughts and ideas now, what makes us think we're going to flip the switch when the crisis arrives? It's not going to work that way. We need to know now the reason for our belief. We need to think. Because a thinker can stand for their beliefs though the heavens fall. But a reflector will go along with the flow when the flow changes. And that flow is going to change very soon. What Satan wants is for you and I to reflect what other people have said, rather than depending upon the Word of God. There will come a time when everyone will think in a certain way, and we will have to go against that. And we will need to stand alone for our beliefs. So, for sake of time, we're going to move through some of this, and I want to focus on this element that we've seen here. It is the work of true education to develop this power. Which power? What's this power? Thinking skills, okay, in place of reflecting. And it contrasts this in a very practical way. It says to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. This was sort of a aha moment for me as an educator, as I realized that right here in this paragraph, we have two systems of education contrasted. Two purposes of education contrasted. It says one of them is focused on creating a thinker, but the other one is focused on creating, what does it say? Reflector. Okay, thinker versus reflector. Two systems of education. One system of education will create a thinker, the other one creates a reflector. And I want to emphasize this. The system that creates a reflector does not create a reflector by accident. It does not create a reflector because it fails to create a thinker. No, it is designed to create a reflector, just like the true system is designed to create a thinker. But as I thought about this, I realized that the system of education that I was being trained to work in was very focused on training a reflector, not a thinker. Year after year, students come to school and we give them textbooks. And what do we tell them to do with those textbooks? Okay, thank you. Say that a little louder. To memorize it, right. We say learn it, but in reality what we mean is memorize this at least long enough for the test, right? Hopefully you'll retain some for life. What's a textbook, though? It's a collection of other men's thoughts. And as I thought about this, I said, wait a minute. Is it possible we have a system that's actually teaching a reflector of other men's thoughts instead of a thinker? Are we spending more time training reflectors or thinkers? So I want to make this practical this morning. We're going to look at 10 ways in which we can train thinkers. And I just want to make some contrasts between true and false education, between conventional methodologies of education, and how we can do better. The first of all, plenty of physical activity. Now, we talked about this yesterday. Some of the benefits of physical activity. Research shows that physical activity actually helps the development of brain areas that are responsible for thinking skills. And research is telling us now that for the young child, physical activity is actually more important than the time they spend studying. We talk about a few brain areas. The cerebellum, for example, is linked with the higher frontal levels in the brain. It's about 40% of the neurons in the cerebellum that connect with the frontal lobe. So a well-developed cerebellum will aid in decision-making abilities, helps with the ability to perform repetitive activities automatically, like handwriting, many cognitive skills, language skills, social interaction, music, and attention. How many have used your cerebellum yet today? 2 or 3 of you. Okay, great. How do we develop the cerebellum? Movement. Movement is absolutely necessary for the development of a part of the brain that connects with thinking skills. But there's more. The hippocampus, a part of the brain responsible for memory, spatial navigation, behavior, emotion, and a lot more. How do we develop the hippocampus? Any guesses? Physical activity, again, is key for developing the hippocampus. Also, the corpus callosum, which is a part of the brain responsible, it's the connection between the brain hemispheres, deals with a lot of cognition, motor skills, a lot of sensory information, and much more, a very important part of the brain. How do we develop the corpus callosum? Physical activity, again, specifically whole body physical activity that uses both sides. This helps develop the corpus callosum. And research actually found that physical activity develops the part of the corpus callosum, it's called the genu of the corpus callosum, that connects with the frontal lobe. So physical activity was helping the part of the brain that connects with the decision-making abilities of the brain. Okay, what type of physical activity do children need? Did you know rocking? When a mother holds her baby and rocks that baby, or including when they, very common here in many parts of Africa, that the mother will wear the baby in a wrap, right? The movement of the mother actually helps develop the brain of the baby. Isn't that incredible? Crawling. We're in such a hurry to get our babies walking. No, let them crawl. Crawling is essential for brain development, especially the development of the corpus callosum. Babies who crawl more tend to have better reading abilities and handwriting abilities later on. Spinning, hanging upside down, and all those sorts of activities that children love to do. This is important for the development of the brain. And there's a lot of science that we could look at on this. And as we've already seen, of course, what's the best form of physical activity? Get out into the garden. No line of manual training will be or is more value than agriculture. I skipped through this slide yesterday. Let me mention a little bit about it. Gardening has been found to improve self-confidence and self-esteem in children. It teaches patience and perseverance. Now, honestly, when I read that, I said, did we need a study to tell us that? How many are involved in agriculture in some way? Yeah, okay. So when you plant your potatoes or your tomatoes, how do you do it? Do you get the smartphone app, Grow Tomatoes, push a few buttons and tomatoes come out? Doesn't work that way, does it? You got to plant it, you have to care for it, you have to pray over it. And with hard work, you'll get a harvest. So, of course, it teaches patience and perseverance. They find children involved in gardening have better science understanding, better test scores, and overall better learners from being involved in the garden. And a lot more research that could be shown with this. Okay, we're talking about ways in which we can educate thinkers. The first, plenty of physical activity. The second one, that children need a quiet and simple lifestyle. Now, I say that as contrast to what is becoming very common today, that children have very full lifestyles because we want to give them many learning experiences, but in reality, many times we're overwhelming the mind with too much input. And they find, for example, too many toys. We're often, we have busy lives. We want to keep our children occupied. And so parents get lots of toys for their children thinking it will benefit them. They'll have something to keep them busy. The research finds the more toys a child has, the more bored they are. More toys, more bored. Because they just go from one thing to another, and they don't learn to focus. How many here grew up with one toy? Just one. Anyone? Okay, maybe one. Zero toys? Anyone zero toys? Yeah, oh, okay, excellent. Do you think that built creativity? Yeah, you had to invent something to play with, right? All right, now children a lot of times today don't have that. Okay, too much in the schedule. They have school, and then they have homework, and then there's all these after-school activities and sports, and we try to fill their lives with so much to do. It's not healthy. They need some more quiet time. They need not so much quiet time, but just time without pressured activities. Too much school. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And media. All of these are what is called overstimulating. They provide too much input. And over time, we reach this point where the brain can't handle it all. They feel like they can't process it, and we start to see symptoms like stress, overactivity, frustration, being irritable, being grouchy, overtired, and superficial thinking because they don't have time to focus on one thing, but they're always going from one thing to another. Children should not be dealing with stress and anxiety. They should be enjoying childhood. So we need to simplify, and we need to go back to the way it used to be. We need to go back to nature. That quiet, simple lifestyle, as Dr. Raymond Moore wrote, quietness, calmness, and freedom from artificial excitement build strength in the immature child. Okay, point 3, too much study. Too much study is a problem in developing thinking skills because we're bombarding them with too much information and they don't have a chance to process and think and apply what they're learning, like I talked about yesterday. Now, I'm not saying that study and schoolwork is a bad thing, but we can have too much of even a good thing. Too much study has been linked to superficial learning, burnout, illnesses, many learning disabilities. So what is too much? Well, as I mentioned yesterday, up until around the age of 8 or 10, around 8 for girls, around 10 for boys, the majority of the time should be spent doing practical things rather than sit down with the bookwork. And then as they enter youth, we have the counsel that the time of study needs to be divided between the gaining of book knowledge and a securing of a knowledge of practical work. Dividing the time, equal portions, study and practical work. And again, this is applicable to youth, not childhood. Childhood, it should be more time in the practical work. Okay, point 4, it's not all about the tests. Let's talk about the effects of testing. Now, many teachers love tests. Testing is becoming extremely common in school today because we want to measure what children are learning. So let's first of all talk about whether it's even a good tool for measuring children's learning. Unfortunately, it's very ineffective many times. It's not a good standard of measurement. It may measure a certain set of abilities, but it doesn't measure true learning. I think about the little story. It was a little book written called First Grade Takes the Test, or you'd say here in Kenya, Standard 1 takes a test. And this is a little group of children. They were taking a test for the first time, taking their exam. And there were simple questions on the test. One of the questions was about rabbits. And it says, what do rabbits eat? And it was multiple choice. One of the questions was lettuce, or one of the answers was lettuce, and then there were some other answers that were obviously wrong. Okay, so everybody should get this right. What do rabbits eat? Okay, it's lettuce. Simple. Well, there was one little boy who said, I don't know what to put here. He said, because I have a rabbit, and my rabbit eats carrots. So, do you see how the test wasn't really measuring his knowledge of rabbits? He probably had more knowledge of rabbits than any of the other students, because he had one. But it wasn't actually measuring his learning. So that's a first problem. It often doesn't measure true learning. Certain children may do well on tests just because they've learned the test. They've learned how to take tests well. But there's another problem, and that is that tests do a very good job at trying to standardize children, and they don't allow for differences in learning styles and learning abilities. And I think one of the greatest illustrations of this is the animal school. Here we have the teacher with all the animals, and he says for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Who will succeed? The monkey, okay. Who will fail? The fish, definitely. Elephant, yeah, most of the rest of them, actually. So the story goes, once upon a time, the animals decided to meet the demands of the new world. They needed to start a school. So they started a school, and in this school, they had a curriculum with 4 subjects. It was an animal school. So they had running, climbing, swimming, and flying. Running, climbing, swimming, and flying. Great animal school. All the animals wanted to get good grades. They were highly motivated learners, so they all tried very hard, and they wanted to do their best. Well, the duck was excellent at swimming, swimming and flying, even better than his teacher, actually. But he lagged behind his classmates in running. He was not a very good runner, so he had to stay after school and practice running. Soon his webbed feet were so worn out from running that now he was only average at swimming. He wasn't good at anything anymore. Then there was a squirrel. Do you have squirrels here in Kenya? Yeah, you do. Okay. I think we could say a monkey also. The analogy would be the same. He was top of his class in running and climbing, and the only one better than him at flying was the duck. He did very well at flying, but he developed some pretty serious frustration issues in the flying class. He was always arguing with his teacher because his teacher said, you must start at the ground and fly to the top of the tree. And the squirrel said, no, that's not how you fly. You climb to the top of the tree, you jump off, and you fly down. Always arguing with his teacher. Then, to make matters worse, because the squirrel was constantly squirming and chattering in class and had difficulty paying attention, always talking with his classmates, he was diagnosed with a learning disorder. He was eventually medicated, placed in remedial classes to be able to continue with his schoolwork. Then there was the rabbit, very good at running, but had a nervous breakdown because of so much makeup work in swimming. And then the fox, the dog. He was natural in his running class, scored very well in climbing and swimming, but became so frustrated at his inability to get good grades at flying that he developed anger issues and started assaulting his classmates. He even tried to eat the duck. His behavior was so disruptive, he was expelled from school. He fell in with a rough crowd and wound up in a center for animal delinquents. The elephant, meanwhile, developed low self-esteem because he couldn't do well in any of the subjects. Aw. He sank into clinical depression, had to go to a therapist. And his therapist said, you need to go to a different school, a school that has subjects like lifting and carrying. Well, the elephant was disappointed because careers in lifting and carrying are not as prestigious as careers in flying and swimming. He always felt inferior, although he did manage to make a decent living and support his family. And then there was a group of animals that were a problem for the school system. In the US, we call them prairie dogs. I don't know if you have something similar here in Kenya. Little animals that live underground. And they stayed out of school and fought the tax levy because the administration would not add digging and burrowing to the curriculum. They apprenticed their children to other animals that were good at digging and joined together to start a very successful homeschool group. Now, we laugh at the story, right? But can we see the serious side of it? Can we see the analogy here? God made every animal different. Is that an accident? No, it's by design. It'd be crazy to have an educational program like this. Has He made every child different? I'm afraid we don't believe that sometimes because we try to have a school system just like what we've just described. Trying to make every child the same, when God has a specific plan for every child in His work, a place no other one can fill. And when we try to have a program like this, it is an affront to God's creative design. And I just want to interject, because I know in the homeschooling community, I get the question all the time, so what's the curriculum for true education? There isn't one, nor can there ever be a curriculum for true education. And I know that comes as a shock. But a curriculum is an attempt to standardize what is supposed to be individualized. God's plan of education is that parents seek him individually and provide an education for their child that is as individualized as that one person to fit them for that one work that God has for them. This cannot be achieved. This cannot be achieved outside of wholehearted and complete dependence upon God, not upon any man-made curriculum. Can we use resources, books, things like that? Yes, nothing wrong with that. But it's not about dependence on a curriculum. It's been said, I'd have more faith in standardized tests if I knew any standard children. But that's not the way it is. And comparative assessments create artificial hierarchies that promote unnecessary competition. That's a problem. Developing character traits that are not good. And discourage students from learning. The factory model of education ignores individual differences in mental abilities and learning rates and learning styles. Children are pressured to meet uniform standards as measured by standardized tests. Those who cannot keep up in this system, as indicated by the test, are often regarded as defective vessels and are labeled learning disabled or ADHD. It is not fair, it is not right, it is not God's plan. Okay, point 5, eat well. We talked yesterday about the role of the health message in the sequence of the messages that the Lord has given us. This is key because what we eat has a profound impact upon our thought, upon our thinking abilities. Pardon. Our diet plays a huge role in the development of thinking skills. And there's a lot that we could talk about here. I'm just mentioning the point, just in the sense that God has given us a plan of diet. They find that artificial additives, sugar, preservatives, dyes, things like that, negatively impact the development of the brain. Processed foods, as was mentioned yesterday. You know, God has given us a perfect diet that we should be growing as much as possible that we can eat. This is the healthiest. Not only does it involve children in the garden, but when they grow and they eat, it's the healthiest form. But nonetheless, wherever it's coming from, plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, non-refined foods, things like that. They're very important for the development of the brain. Point 6, mix the ages. Okay, this is a very, very important point. Have we noticed the trend in society today that children spend the majority of their time with others the same age? In school, they're divided by age. In sports, they're divided by age. And, dare I say this, in church, divided by age. Is this God's plan? God created the family that is not divided by age. This was his ideal educational environment. And in this plan, children will learn from adults and older ones and grandparents and aunts and uncles and their older siblings. And those who are older develop patience in dealing with the younger ones, right? And in this age-mixed environment, you have much higher maturity of thinking skills because you have to think outside of your group, outside of your own abilities, outside of yourself. This is the ideal environment for mentorship, for maturity. Satan does not want this, and he's divided it, right? He's trying to create a system where you're grouped by age, you're grouped with others who more or less think the same way you do. And in this peer environment, it's very hard to think differently, isn't it? It's hard to stand alone because of the pressure. This is a new idea, though, in the history of the world. The placement of children in separate classes with others of the same age is a fairly recent phenomenon. Age segregation did not occur in full force until the advent of compulsory education laws brought a large influx of children to the public school system. Never in history until the 20th century have young people been largely separated from the ongoing productive activities of society. So children used to be in the family environment, but now millions of children coming to the school system as a result of compulsory education. You have to divide them up. You have to organize them somehow. Well, what's the logical way to organize children? Well, it's by age. But that doesn't mean it's good because we're separating them from what it means to be an adult. Does such division take place naturally anywhere? Are we all the same age here? In industry, do all 21-year-old laborers work separately from 20-year-olds or 23-year-olds? In business, are there separate rooms for 30-year-old executives and 31-year-old executives? Where on earth was this idea conceived? Is anything more, notice what he says, is anything more socially damaging than segregating children by year for 14 or often 18 years? Social damage? But what's the number one argument given why children need to be with other children the same age? Say it louder. Socialization, right? That's a myth. That's a myth, if I can just say it clearly. Studies find that actually children need to be in a mixture of ages for proper socialization. Let me give a simple example here. There's a concept known as the zone of proximal development, and children develop primarily by attempting tasks they can accomplish only in collaboration with a more competent individual. All right, so if we take a little child here, 2, 3 years old, he's toddling along, and he finds a ball. And he picks up this ball, and he carries it along, and he finds another child the same age. And he says, hey, let's play a game. Let's play a game of catch. You go over there. And they start throwing the ball back and forth. Possible? They don't have the maturity to be able to do this, right? So no zone of proximal development, no real learning, no cognitive development going on here other than, well, we can't play the game. Okay? Now, let's imagine another scenario. This little boy, little girl, whatever, finds the ball, picks up the ball, toddles along, and now he finds an older child or an adult. Is a game of catch now possible? Of course it is, right? Why? Because you have a more competent individual that he can do this task with. So you actually have better learning when you're in the age-mixed environment. You can advance as far as possible, but when you're grouped with other children the same age, you can only advance as far as the group goes, right? So this is why God's ideal is placed in the family. It actually encourages greater learning, greater maturity. And studies find better results in academics in an age-mixed environment, better self-esteem, and even better socialization skills. It's just a myth. It's the lie of the world, a lie of Satan that says children need to be with a group of other children the same age for proper socialization. No. That is Satan's attempt to normalize, standardize, and lower the ability to think. Thank you. All right. The results seem to show that a child's social development depends more on adult contact and less on contact with other children as previously thought. This is Dr. Larry Shires, who conducted research. Thomas Smedley was another name. They conducted research on socialization and found very clearly that it actually depends on having other adults around for good social development. And this is just logical when you think about it. I was talking with a friend of mine, a professor, and we were just saying what is our goal in raising children? Is it so that they stay children or so that they become adults? Become adults, right? Okay. And my friend said, children don't learn how to be adults from other children. They learn from adults. If we're going to prepare them for adulthood, if we want to develop spiritual maturity in them, we should not be grouping them by age. They need to be learning in the family setting. And I just want to mention, I know this is radical, but yes, this applies to church settings. Yes, this applies to the Sabbath school settings. We are lowering the maturity level. We're not preparing our children spiritually by grouping them with other children the same age, even in the Sabbath school and spiritual settings, because they're not in the environment where they can benefit from those of more spiritual maturity. I actually wrote a book about this. I'll have it on the table. It's called Gather the Children. Okay, point 7, limit media. Now, I wish we had time to go into this topic. It's a big one. Do you think media is affecting our thinking skills? Do you think it's doing a good job of standardizing everyone to think the same way? Powerfully so. And the research is absolutely clear. Children should be off the media at least until the age of 12. Media should be used as a tool, not a toy. Parents ask me, okay, how many hours a day should I allow my children to have media? That's the wrong question. The right question is, do they need it? It's not about how much time. Because okay, an hour a day, what are they going to do? Well, I don't know, whatever they want to do. Why do you need it, okay? If it's a tool, you're going to use it when you need it for something, not because you just have an hour to spend on it, all right? And the research is very, very clear on this. Let me just read this one. Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, a world elite addiction specialist, he says, I've worked with hundreds of heroin addicts and crystal meth addicts, and what I can say is it's easier to treat a heroin addict than a true screen addict. We need to be treating this seriously, all right? And the research is very clear. It's not just about the content. It's not a matter of whether they're looking at something good or bad on it. That's beside the point almost in terms of brain development when we consider the fact that just being in the media environment is negative for development. Okay, and this is actually a DVD series that I have. I'll have that with the materials also on the effects of media on children. Point 8, practical work. Practical work is vital for developing thinking skills. An education derived chiefly from books leads to superficial thinking. Why? Because you're depending upon someone else to think, to come up with the ideas. You're just reflecting them. Nothing wrong with books, of course. But if we're deriving the education chiefly from books, it leads to superficial thinking. Practical work encourages close observation and independent thought. Practical work is a powerful stimulus to developing good thinking skills. It is vital. I was trying to think of a good example for this, and I think I'll just share it from my own experience. I grew up with a lot of practical work, lived in the country for many of my growing up years, still do, and that's been a huge blessing to me. And a little while ago, I had a tractor that was having some issues, and I needed to rebuild the engine. And I have some mechanical experience, but this was the largest diesel engine rebuild I had done. But I completed it and runs fine, no problems. And someone was talking with me a little bit later, and I mentioned that I had done this, and they asked me a question. They said, well, who taught you how to do that? And that question got me thinking. Because my immediate reaction was, well, who taught me? Well, who says someone has to teach me? Can't I figure it out? You see the difference there? In school, we depend on someone to teach us. And so when you get out of school, if you haven't been taught, you supposedly don't know how. But in practical work, you have to figure it out. You have to apply your mind, accomplish something, problem solve. So then when you face a problem-solving situation later in life, it's like, okay, I've never done this before, but that's okay, I'll figure it out. It's far more important that we teach our children how to think than what to think. You see the difference there? School teaches us what to think. And sometimes we do this in homeschooling circles too. We just take the school and we put it at home. But that's not true education. True education is about training how to think, how to problem solve, rather than just trying to give them all the information. So, practical work, vital for developing good thinking skills. Point 9, we need to encourage thinking. We need to talk with our children, engage in conversation with them. This is a great way to develop thinking skills. We need to allow children to figure things out and learn by exploring, and allow them to make some minor mistakes. Some little mistakes in the practical duties of everyday life are great for developing thinking skills. All right, point 10. This is our last point on educating thinkers, and I must say I hesitated to even put it in here because it really takes more than a few minutes to explain. I could spend 3 hours just on point number 10. But my timekeeper over here won't let me. So, no. We have other topics to get into, right? So, I just want to highlight the point, introduce it, and encourage you to continue to do more study. Avail yourselves of the resources that I'll have on the table. And that is wait for school. Wait for school. What do we mean by that? Well, we have some counsel in the Spirit of Prophecy that says parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parents should open before them God's great book of nature. Who does it say the teacher should be? Parents, okay. Until what age? 8 to 10, okay. And what should the textbook be? Math, science, arithmetic? No, it says nature. And it says the only schoolroom should be in the open air, amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery, and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. That's some interesting counsel. So we're seeing here the teachers, until the age of 8 or 10, the teachers should be the parents, the textbook should be nature, the classroom should be outdoors. Does this sound like a typical kindergarten curriculum? Very different, right? So, is this just some kind of outdated idea that maybe doesn't apply today? Or might we find that modern science supports what God told us over 100 years ago? And I wish we had the time to dive into this. Let me mention a few points quickly. When we consider brain development, sorry, I'm going to bump ahead to this slide. Okay, considering brain development here. There we go. All right, here we go. If we consider a schedule of brain development, from conception to around 15 months, we have very basic brain development. 15 months to around 4.5 years, limbic system and relationship areas of the brain are developing. This is one of the reasons it's important to have that connection with the mother at this early age. And then at around 4.5 to around 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys, we have the gestalt areas of the brain developing. And boys do have a slower period of growth in these years. It's about a 2-year difference. They need more time in the gestalt areas development. Then at around 7 to 9 years and on, we have the logic areas developing, and then at around 8 years and on, the frontal lobe period of development. Now, let me contrast these two areas, the gestalt areas and the logic areas. Left hemisphere, or logic areas, tends to deal with detail, parts and processes of language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, and reasoning skills. Whereas the right areas, now, I just want to clarify, in case there's any neuroscientists here going, you're really simplifying this. I know. I know. It's not purely the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. That's why we say logic areas, gestalt areas, but this is a good generalization. The right, or the gestalt areas of the brain tend to deal with images, rhythm, emotion, intuition, imagination, creativity, feeling, faith, belief, and large motor control. Okay, comparing these two areas, which one would be important for academic learning as we know it? Okay, the left, definitely, right? Detail, language, logic, numbers, reasoning, all that sort of thing. Very important. But, okay, backing up here. What age do we see that begin its major stage of development? Around 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys. But what's a typical school starting age? 4, 5, right? So what happens when we try to start a learning process for which the correct region of the brain has not even developed? We're going to create something known as a functional disorganization. And just to summarize that, the areas of the brain responsible for many academic types of learning are not developed until around 8 years of age, even 10 in boys. And so if we take a little child, we put him in class, we try to ask him to do something for which the correct area of the brain is not developed, the brain will try to find somewhere else that has developed, and it will create a neural route through an already developed section, resulting in an almost permanent organizational damage. Later on, when they are perfectly capable of learning that particular thing, they formed a bad habit of learning through the wrong part of the brain. And so we start to see problems in learning disabilities. Or they think, oh, I'm just bad at such and such a subject. They may not be bad at it. It may be that it was started too early. A lot of the problems we find in education today can be avoided if we would just be patient about when we start. Again, lots of science that could be talked about here. Let me mention a few other points quickly here. Why we shouldn't be starting school at this early age. Eye development. The eyes physically and neurologically are not developed for reading up until around the age of 9. If we try to try to have long periods of reading too early, some children will teach themselves how to read. They'll figure it out at an early age. That's fine, but we want to limit it to short periods of time because of the effect on the eyes, because it's very connected with myopia, with nearsightedness. When we look into the distance, our eyes are at rest. When we look at things up close, the eyes are more stressed, the ciliary bodies have to contract, and we start to see problems with myopia, just as a result of reading too early and a lack of time outdoors. Physical development. Children love to run and to play. That's actually necessary for their development. What is the most common command given to children in the classroom? Okay, I'm hearing it. There's 2, actually. Sit still and be quiet. Okay. We are actually, let me share just a tidbit of science here. Research has found that the chemical, it's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This chemical is actually necessary for myelination to proceed, the process of myelinating the neurons, which is key to development. And The brain-derived neurotrophic factor is released through exercise. So when we move, it causes the release of chemicals that actually help the brain develop. When we tell a child to sit still for hours a day, we prevent their brain from developing. Okay, but what about telling them to be quiet all the time? You ever notice a group of children playing? Are they perfectly quiet? Hardly. What about a child by himself playing? Is he quiet? Not usually. If he's quiet for too long, you start getting worried, right, moms? Usually a little child playing by himself keeps talking to himself. Why? It's something known as inner speech. Inner speech is the ability we have to think without saying it out loud, but children don't have that. Children actually need to talk out loud. So we tell them to sit still and be quiet. We are preventing their brain from developing and preventing them from thinking. The best thing we can do to help our children do better academically later on is engage in conversation with them, engage in plenty of physical activity. What about emotional development? When we take a child, we send them off to school. Research shows very clearly children need a secure, permanent attachment figure in the first years of their life. When you send them off to school, you've broken that attachment figure, you've broken those relationships. It causes huge emotional issues, and emotional development is the foundation for cognitive development. This is why when we have a child who's not doing well in school, has a learning disability, a good researcher will look at their home environment. And many times they find abuse, neglect, divorce, something that's created an emotional disturbance that's actually causing them to have a learning problem. The best way we can help our children do better at school is to provide emotional security in the first 7 years of their life, especially 3 years, but then 7 years also. Socialization skills, we've already touched on this. Children need a wide mixture of ages for socialization. Send them off to school, put them in their peer group. They will not learn social skills as well. Memory skills, this is fascinating. Research finds indigenous peoples around the world who don't spend very much time in school have prodigious memories, the best memories of any people group in the world. But what happens as we go to school, we start learning that some book holds the information and we don't use our memories as well. They find the more time you spend in school, especially at an early age, the worse the memory. What about reading skills? People are worried about this. Let me just show you a study that was done, and there's a lot of research, but let me just show you this one. It illustrates it well, comparing two groups of children and their reading abilities, specifically decoding and reading fluency. The blue representing a group of children who started learning to read at age 5. The orange representing a group of children who started learning to read at age 7. Look at age 5. First one on the left here, first group starting. Age 6, there's a few of the second group learning on their own, but then age 7, the second group begins to be taught how to read. Look at age 8. Okay, the second group is advancing, so has the first group. If we stop the study at age 8, what would we conclude? Should start early, right? Okay, look what happens between age 8 and 9. The second group catches up to the ones who started earlier. Meanwhile, the earlier ones actually plateaued. They didn't advance very much. Look at age 11. The group who started later actually passed the ones who started earlier. It was a waste of time to start 2 years earlier. And this is just one study out of many. If you have questions on this, come talk to me later, and I have resources on the table that explain this more. What about the effect on boys? I highlight this because I think it's very clear. Satan is attacking men, what it means to be a man. We are losing male leadership in our churches, in our homes. Now, I just kind of gave it away, but what is God's purpose for our men? Spiritual leadership, amen? Are we all on the same page there? I asked that question a while ago, and the group didn't know, and I was saddened by that. We're losing what it means to be a man, to lead in a true and godly manner in his home, in his church. Satan does not want this, and we see problems. We see boys suffering more than girls, and that is because of that 2-year difference in brain development. All the effects we've just discussed will be intensified in the boys. What are we seeing today? Boys today are not learning as well as girls. They receive 70% of the D's and F's. Okay, that's an American standard of measurement there, but the lowest 2 grades on the system given to all students. Boys cause 90% of classroom discipline problems. 80% of all high school dropouts are boys. Millions of boys are on Ritalin and other mind-bending control drugs, and 3 out of 4 students labeled learning disabled are boys. ADHD, the vast majority are boys. So did God just create boys to be a problem? Or is it possible, when we have so many boys suffering, is the problem with the boys or is the problem with the system? Just a thought there. It's been said we're treating boys like defective girls. Do I need to say that again? Treating boys like defective girls. We compare them. And you take a little boy, put them in the classroom at the age of 6. You take a little girl, put them in the classroom at the age of 6. Who's going to be struggling more? It's the little boy. And we compare the two and we say, well, something must be wrong with the boy because the girl's doing fine. No, nothing's wrong with the boy. He's just a boy. He's different. He needs to learn in an active way. Boys need activity. They need to run. They need to jump. They need to build towers and knock them down. They need to play with their cars and crash them. They need the action. It's okay. They're developing that strength for leadership. We tend to think that this activity is something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. I've often said the most misdiagnosed problem in childhood today is ADHD. The correct diagnosis, do you know what it is? B-O-Y. Boy. There's nothing wrong with him. He doesn't have ADHD. He's a boy who needs to move. He needs to get outside. But you take this little bundle of energy, you put it in the classroom, you tell it, sit still and be quiet. What's going to happen? It's going to explode. And we say, oh, something's wrong with him. Let's give him some medication. So you sedate and feminize this little boy. I have a whole talk on that. We don't have time. Okay, ADHD. Study found delaying kindergarten entrance by 1 year reduced ADHD by 73%. What about if we waited till 8 to 10? And eliminated media. That's a huge factor also. Will the children be left behind? How will they catch up if you wait till 8 to 10? No problem. Studies find very clearly children catch up very, very quickly when the brain is ready. The problem is when we start so early, the brain's not ready for this academic learning, and so we have to spend so much more time in repetition, lots of exercises. But if you wait till they're older, you learn from everyday life, you teach conceptually instead of just by rote, they'll actually do much better and they'll catch up in a short period of time. And then we come to the most important aspect, and that's spirituality. Research shows that the early years are a window of time for developing spirituality, cause to affect reasoning, emotion, relationships, behavior management, language skills, memory skills, moral understanding, conscience, and character development is all developed in the first 7 years of a child's life. And our enemy understands this all too well. And he's getting us distracted, focusing on things that are not as important, knowing that the academics training can come later, but he doesn't want us to focus on character. In reality, this counsel about waiting until 8 to 10 is more about what to do rather than what not to do. What do I mean by that? It's more about that you need to focus on character and you don't have time to focus on the academic training. That can come later. And so we have this counsel. Parents, especially mothers, should be the only teachers of such infant minds. They should not educate from books. The children generally will be inquisitive to learn the things of nature. They will ask questions in regard to the things they see and hear, and parents should improve the opportunity to instruct and patiently answer these little inquiries. They can, in this manner, get the advantage of the enemy and fortify the minds of their children by sowing good seed in their hearts, leaving no room for the bad to take root. The mother's loving instructions at a tender age is what is needed by children in the formation of character. And as the book Education says so well, true education is not the forcing of instruction on an unready and unreceptive mind. The mental powers must be awakened, the interest aroused. It is the work of true education to develop a thinker and not a reflector of other men's thoughts. We've had a crash course this morning. We've looked at some basic principles. I wish we had more time, but that's okay. I want to encourage each one of you, keep studying and consider the points that we've mentioned. And ask yourself, okay, what things am I doing that is allowing Satan to have, to make inroads in damaging the thinking skills of my children? We're fighting a battle, and we need to be awake to the battle. I have a hand for questions. Can we take questions, or? Say again? We have 10 more minutes. We have 10 more minutes. This is remarkable. Okay, go ahead. If you could, perhaps we need a microphone for this young lady to be able to, just for the live stream so that we can hear.
One. Okay, I was saying I have a question going back to plenty of physical activity. So I understand we were talking about children who are still developing. However, what about a developed brain? Can it also be repaired by plenty of physical activity?
I'm glad you asked. Yes. The simple answer is yes. You know, God has a plan A, but I'm thankful He's patient with us when we don't follow that plan A. And so, what we should do when we've perhaps not done it correctly originally is just go back and do a lot of what we should have done before. So physical activity is absolutely key. Getting outside, spending time in nature, meditation, Bible study, all of these things strengthen the mind. So yes, physical activity is essential throughout life. It's more important, or I should say it's vitally important, in the early years for the developing brain. But even after we enter young adulthood, as we get into adulthood, physical activity must be maintained as a balanced lifestyle for proper health of the brain. Yeah, thank you for that. Godfrey?
What if that time has already passed and the child has been using the wrong type of the brain? Is there still any way in which that child can be helped to come out?
Good question, yes. Well, thankfully the brain is extremely plastic. There's a lot of things that can be done to help remodel it. It will never be the ideal, of course, but that's okay. You know, we don't live in an ideal world, and I'm thankful that the Lord is patient. He works with us. So the things that we can do to help reset the brain, the first thing is take an academic break. This is key. I have a whole paper written on this, actually. But there's a lot of research, a lot of evidence that I've seen that there's a huge benefit from taking 6 months to a year and just take a break from the books and focus on what should have been done earlier, okay? So the physical activity, time in nature, Bible study, all these things. Take a break from the academics, focus on what should have been done earlier. As part of that also, perhaps you notice that the child has a particular struggle with a particular subject. Invent ways in which they can learn that subject in practical ways. Let me give you an example. I have some friends, their boys were struggling with math. They had started a bit early. They said, you know, we're having some issues here. Let's take a break. And during this academic break, they were going to take a year. They said, we're going to spend a lot of time in the workshop, in the carpentry shop, because there's a lot of math you can learn in that environment. And so they did that. They would draw out their blueprints and then build projects. And they said at the end of the year, when they went back to the academic study, their boys were more advanced in math than if they had continued in the academic study the whole time. They actually had to say, oh, we don't need this grade anymore. We can just skip a few grades. So that time away from the books actually did them benefit academically. So taking an academic break is key. Invent ways to learn in practical, hands-on ways. This helps trick the brain into forming new neural routes and helps reverse some of this damage. Secondly, study of the Word of God is vital. Spending time in nature is vital. Time in agriculture is vital. Time in nature is vital. Again, basically everything we should have done before, you do it now. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Question there? Oh, did you have one, sister?
No, there's two more.
Right here. Okay, I don't know who was first. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I want to request that you go back to the slide on encouraged thinking. I think you went through it so fast.
I did.
Thank you.
I did go through it very fast. All of this is available on a DVD series that I will have on the table, so you can access that. Okay, right here. Talk with your children. As they engage in that conversation, children love to talk. When they ask a question, you know, why? Take a moment and say, well, why do you think? And start some conversation, okay? Allowing them to figure things out, learning by exploring. It's not just spoon feeding them the information that they need, but allow them to discover and learn and problem solve. And then allowing some minor mistakes. You know, when they knock a glass on the floor and it breaks, now they have to clean it up, okay? And they learn some cause to effect reasoning. This helps influence thinking skills. All right, was there a question here?
Mine is somehow personal. I have 2 young boys. So when I send them out to play, they are 3 and 5. They come back and follow me around in the house as I'm doing my things. So, and if I sit out with them, they would play in the garden and do that. So do I have to organize myself to actually sit out with them so that they can be playing outside? Or do I just allow them to follow me around as I do my chores?
Okay, I'll be talking about this not tomorrow, but the day after, the Deuteronomy method. The Deuteronomy method is a lifestyle of education in which parents and children do everything together. So yes, you need to go out and not sit and watch them play. You need to play with them. And with the time inside, they want to follow you around, involve them actually. And you're like, well, this is going to take forever because they're going to make a mess. That's okay, all right? They need to help you wash the dishes. They need to help you prepare the meals. Yes, it'll take 5 times longer. Yes, it makes a mess, but that's okay, okay? You're investing in relationship. So you should actually shift this mindset. And I'm not picking on you. This is a mindset we have as a society that's like, okay, let me get my work done and let the children do their play, and it's more efficient that way. God's methods of education are not about efficiency. They're about connection and relationship. I love what it says in the book Education about Jesus, how he formed a family with his disciples. He allowed them into every aspect of his life. And it says, and as much as in them was, allowed them to enter into his work. Do you think they made mistakes as they engaged in his work? Ooh, what a risk Jesus took and said, here, you guys go out 2 by 2, engage in this work. What mistakes I'm sure they made, but that was okay. Jesus recognized it wasn't about efficiency. It was about connecting with his disciples, seeing their conversion, seeing them become efficient in the work of the Lord. And so this is the core. So in direct answer to your question, yeah, go out there, play with them, involve them in every aspect of the day, do everything together. This is far more educational than any book that you could put in front of them. Yes.
So I wanted to thank you first. This has been really mind-blowing and enlightening. I work at a school, and so a lot of the things you said made total sense. I work with twins, and a boy and a girl. And the girl is super go-getter, choleric, she's very on top of her work, and the boy is super discipline problem, super behind, very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
We've learned how to work, but it's very slow.
Of course.
And so this makes sense, and he's a discipline problem in his class. And I've seen that with I hear about other children. Some of them, there's a set of quadruplets that came when they were 4, and so it's just very, like, some of them are problems. The boy, this is one boy. Anyway, so this makes a lot of sense. So now, being in that environment, I think for me the question would be what kind of tools I could use individually, because this is a system. It's supposed to be a Christian school, but the kids learn Harry Potter, they learn a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So what would be ways that I could interact with that child in something that's already a system? So as you were teaching, I was thinking maybe I could share some of these books with the academic people. But other than that, what can I do for that child?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question I hear a lot. It's a real challenge because you're within the confines of a system, as you've already said. And I think it's important to realize, as I've talked about problems with the school, I'm not at all criticizing teachers, because we have very good teachers like yourself who are trying their best. But when you're working in the confines of that system, it's very hard to break out of that mold. The best thing teachers can do is, number one, seek for a relationship with their students. That means it's not just about what they're imparting in the instructional time, but it's about spending all the time together, trying to connect with them somehow. Because relationship not only helps children do better spiritually, which obviously is our goal as Christian parents, but it's actually been found to help children academically when they have that connection, especially with their teacher. So investing in relationship. The second thing you can do in your lesson planning, as you're planning on what you're going to be teaching, try to invent ways for more practical learning methods. So if you're teaching math, you're going to do fractions, bring a chapati to school and cut it into fractions. You know, something just what came to my mind. But invent ways to learn in practical ways. If they're learning writing, learning about letters, to bring some string and form the letters, or some pencils to make an A, you know, things like that. Do things to keep it as practical and hands-on as possible. Certainly, talk with the administrators, see what can be done to make changes. But I tell you, one of the biggest changes or challenges that we often face is it's actually not so much the teachers or administration as it is the parents who are expecting a certain thing. And so this is why, the council is clear in terms of how our schools as a denomination should be run. They actually should be working to help the parents. And I experienced this with a school that I was working with when we made some changes to the kindergarten program, in that the children were not doing so much book work, they were doing more hands-on things, and they started going back to their homes, and the parents started complaining because the children weren't bringing homework home. And they thought their children weren't learning anymore. So we just called a meeting with the parents. We explained the methods that we used. We explained the reasons why. And the parents were like, yeah, this is great. And they were all on board now. So a lot of times, not only is there education of the fellow teachers, education of the administration, but it's also education of the parents so that they can know not only what to expect from the school, but also what they should be doing in the home. There was an experimental school that was done many years ago in which the teachers were required to visit the parents every week for an hour and a half and actually work with the parents in their homes. And those schools, it was a longitudinal study, they followed the results for over 40 years. Those schools, the students who came out of those schools proved to be far more successful as adults because the parents had received training from the teachers to do a better job in the home. So those are just a few things that can be done. Again, just to recap there, focus on relationship, invent practical ways for learning, see what can be done with the system, with the administration to make changes, and also work with the parents. Yeah, good question. Okay, I think we're out of time now. I'll take one last question.
When we were growing up,
Okay.
the parents were supposed to remove some foolishness with the rod. How do you discipline children? Because our children are not disciplined. We don't beat.
Right.
The children talk to us. And for a time now, the children have become the adults in the house.
Yeah.
The child has to grow up to know what is good and what is right from the parent. Because what happens in the situation like a church is a reflection of what happens at home. We don't discipline our children. Are we supposed to discipline them?
Yeah, okay. Good question. Yes, we are supposed to discipline them, but we need to define what discipline is. Okay? We have often culturally, certain cultures more than others, we define discipline as beating them with the rod. That's not discipline. That may be a form of discipline, but that is not discipline at its definition. Discipline is to make a disciple. How did Jesus make disciples? He invested in relationship. He sacrificed himself. He spent all of his time with them. He guided them and directed them step by step every single moment. That's discipline. Very rarely did Jesus actually administer a correction to them. Okay? So you've asked a huge question. We don't have to, they're telling me we're out of time. But just so that we understand what discipline is, we need to look at the methods of Jesus and realize that, yes, there may be times that correction is necessary, but God's method of discipline is to disciple, which means we actually focus more on preventing the problem and instruction rather than correcting a problem. So that requires sacrifice on the part of the parents, time together with the children, and I mean all the time. You can't do it unless it's a full-time investment in time with the children. And then as you recognize the issues that develop, you can work with them and shape them rather than just trying to correct a problem that comes up. Many of the problems that come up in children, many of the behavioral issues we see are actually a seeking for connection and relationship. They are a reaction to a lack of connection. And so when a parent invests in that connection from an early age, will prevent a lot of the problems that we see later on. So that's the summary, all right? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to come and talk with me. Again, I'll get the materials set up on a table out there. You can avail yourselves of those. It's been a pleasure, and tomorrow morning we'll take another topic. Thank you very much.